Okay, so welcome back. I hope that you're enjoying your kind of whirlwind tour of the Indus Valley so far. In this clip, we're going to be looking at how scholars have been making sort of educated guesses or hypotheses about three kinds of topics: the social or civil structure of these IVC cities, the political economy of the civilization, and their fascinating trade connections with other civilizations of the time. Let's get started. Now, first, let's ask, what would everyday life in a Harappa city have felt like? We've seen the architecture, the plumbing, the weights and measures, bricks, bead making techniques, writing systems, and all that, and we've seen that it was highly standardized. This means that it was pretty much the same in different cities across the entire country. It's pretty remarkable, I think you'll agree, that a place the size of Texas in like 2500 BC had this degree of standardization. Scholars have kind of conjectured from this that there must have been a strong central state or a bureaucracy of some kind that enforced these regulations all over the place and made sure that people followed the same standards in different cities in the civilization. Another thing that seems relatively clear was that there was a class divide in this ancient culture between people who lived in the upper part of the town versus the lower town. Even in the lower town, there seems to have been further differences between houses that have wells with water and bathrooms and those that don't. Now, it's not at all surprising to say that the IVC culture would have had class divisions, of course, since all human societies have class divisions. But in a situation where, as we'll see, the economy doesn't seem to run on currency or gold, it's kind of interesting to think further about and guess what might have separated elite from the commoners. If it wasn't money, then what was it? What made them different? One theory has been that it was a control of water. The upper city had that great bath, which had plenty of water all the time. The lower city had houses with wells, and then there was ones who had none, who presumably had only the river to use for their water. Water for bathing, for purification, agriculture, and for traveling up and down the Indus. This seems to have been an extremely treasured social commodity in the Indus Valley civilization. Along these lines, some scholars have suggested that all those seals that we saw in the last clip might have functioned kind of like IDs or passports to let people in the city know who you belong to, what guild or family you were part of, what you were doing there in the city, what your status was. Now, what can we say about the political structure of the IVC, which would have fostered this kind of hierarchical society? It seems reasonable to suppose that rulers or governmental bodies used taxation or tariffs of some kind to control the flow of goods in and out of cities that would help them manage these industries and make sure that everything runs smoothly. But then again, how are you taxing? Because there was no such thing as money, remember? So it must have been done through some kind of communal trust in the law or authority of the government. Maybe the priest king was this kind of authority. Who knows? Remember, Mortimer Wheeler saw this priest king bust here as a reflection of a theologized rulership that used deification as a way to enforce political authority. We can see that in other ancient states too, in Egypt and early China, Mesopotamia. The ruler is considered to be a living embodiment of the highest God. So Wheeler thought that this priest king in the IVC was the same way, and they controlled the population through kind of state-sponsored public rituals, maybe at that bath in the citadel where royal power was kind of on stark display. Now, interestingly, the IVC rulers don't seem to have controlled the population through brute strength. Remember, there are very few weapons that we find. There's also no depictions of any kind of like person-to-person combat in any of the artwork of the IVC, although you do see men and women fighting against buffaloes or tigers. There's also no indication that any large-scale warfare or violence took place. There's no evidence of sacked cities or mass destruction or large army camps or anything like that. All of this would indicate a surprisingly peaceful city which might maybe be also another real secret of the IVC, how did they manage to live all together in peace and harmony? Now, one thought is that it might have been a kind of corporate scheme, like a modern company, let's say, where power comes not through brute force, right? Your boss doesn't beat you up, right? But through more subtle forms of social prestige and customary traditions to kind of normalize a hierarchy. Maybe this civilization was run by councils or inner circles rather than despotic kings. Again, all of this is speculation because there's no way of knowing for sure. We just have to make guesses. Now, one thing that we are beginning to be more confident about, however, is that the Indus Valley civilization, the people of this IVC were kind of like ancient jet setters. They got around. A number of IVC artifacts have been found in Mesopotamia, and there's also signs of contact with Egypt and China as well. Again, people haven't fully settled on this yet. In Mesopotamia, which is in modern-day Iraq, there are mention of a certain traders from a place called Meluha bearing luxury goods and exotic animals and so on. The theory is that this Meluha name refers to the IVC. Some experts think that actually it might be referring to enclaves or villages located in Mesopotamia that IVC people had set up kind of at the frontiers of Mesopotamia itself, rather than so that they didn't have to do long distance trade. The idea is that Indus craftsmen kind of moved and set up permanent settlements in Mesopotamia, but still maintained their connections and raw material access to their homeland. They would get materials from IVC and then sell the goods to Sumerians and Akkadians in Mesopotamia. The goods weren't authentically IVC goods, actually, but they were reshaped to appeal to Mesopotamian tastes rather than Indus Valley tastes. It's kind of like if you think about immigrant communities today, let's say from like Thailand or India, who come to Vancouver, they might open up Thai restaurants or Indian restaurants, but they'll cook the food in a way that appeals to Canadian tastes, right? Rather than Thai tastes or Indian tastes. You can actually see that with Chinese food in India, by the way, as well. It gets modified to appeal to Indian palates rather than being authentically Chinese. This is maybe what was going on when IVC bead making and clothes and artwork began to be produced by Meluhans living in Mesopotamia rather than coming directly from the IVC. In support of this idea, it's remarkable that not a single Mesopotamian artifact has been yet found in the Indus Valley. It could be because the Mesopotamians didn't need to go all the way to the Indus to trade with them. It could also mean that the Indus Valley folks simply weren't interested in Mesopotamian goods. They liked their own stuff. Who knows? Anyway, to close this section, let's take a closer look at some of the textual and visual evidence of what Indus Valley culture looked like through the eyes of Mesopotamia, through people in the Middle East. Right? In the first seal you see here, the text explains that this little fellow sitting on the lap of the emperor of Babylon in about 2020 BC is a Meluhan translator named Shu-ilishu. The visitors, we suppose, are Meluhans, and they're there to do some business, some kind of trade. A second cylinder seal shows a scene that's unmistakably Indusy. There's yogi figure sitting down with a water buffalo headdress, just like the famous Pashupati yogi seal that we're going to talk about in our next clip. And then there's a standing fellow battling two tigers on either side, which is also kind of a copy of a tablet found in Harappa that you see here. The fact that this seal was made and found in Mesopotamia, not in the Indus Valley, is very strong evidence that the IVC communities were living there in Mesopotamia, not that they were just doing long distance trade. Now, all of this is an area of IVC studies that's very active and still progressing. There's a lot more work that people are doing, and there's still to be done, but we can gather a few ideas maybe to kind of wrap up our section here. One, the IVC was one of the most complex, large-scale societies that the world had ever seen up to that point. 2, it was heavily standardized and well-planned. And 3, it was remarkably industrious in its commercial activities, not just in the IVC itself, but also in foreign countries far away from home.